Welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. And today we're going to take a walk in a very different part of the innovation landscape. We are talking about trash. We are talking about revitalizing urban areas, and we are talking about seeing people and systems in a whole new light that we can innovate them and make change. And there is absolutely no one better on the planet to be having this conversation with than Dr. Judith Tumusiime, who is currently the Federal Grants Manager at the Cambridge Community Development Department. And if you don't know, the Community Development Department of Cambridge is the planning agency for the city, whose mission is to foster a livable, sustainable, just, and equitable community. How many of us, show of hands, have that exact mandate in our respective organizations, be it municipal or corporate? I wanted to speak with Judith because she is also a senior professional who has solid expertise in urban development and research in academia and government institutions, as well as nonprofit and the private sector in the United States, in Africa, in Europe. And so that wealth of experience is exactly the kind of insight I want to bring to you here on the show. And it's why I'm so excited that Dr. Judith is here with me today. She is kind and open-hearted because she also offers her consulting services pro bono to nonprofits that are operating in the Boston area. And she is a judge and a mentor in the Harvard Innovation Labs, which is how we got connected. She has been part of the teaching team of Harvard's Ash Center for the Innovation Field Lab, and she was also a Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative Fellow and a protagonist in 3 of their case studies that are still taught today. She was published in several publications in international peer-reviewed journals, and she has her PhD from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, an MPA from Harvard, an MBA from the University of Warwick, and an MSc in Environment and Natural Resources from Makerere University in beautiful Uganda in Kampala. So we are super excited to have Dr. Judith with us today. Thank you so much for joining me on the Innovation Storyteller Show.
Thank you so much, Susan. My pleasure to be here.
So we're going to have a really off the rails conversation today about the craziest thing that nobody wants to talk about, which is trash. And we're going to elevate this conversation into what it actually means for the rest of us who, might think of the corporate trash that we have to take out every day in order to move our innovations forward. But we're starting this conversation because it's something that every single one of us produces. Every single one of us has to take to the curb at some point. And also, you have created such dynamic ways of thinking about what is the most mundane thing that can make all the difference in the world, literally turning trash to gold. And so give us a little bit of background first, Dr. Judith. You are a native of Uganda, right? You are a sister of Uganda, a daughter of that great country. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how you got into innovation to begin with. How did this all get started for you?
Yeah, I'm a daughter of Uganda, and I want to tell you that one of the reasons that I got into innovation was, to try and help my country, specifically my city, Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda. So growing up in Kampala and also seeing how the city was changing over time with increase in population. So I was thinking about ways in which we can continue to maintain it as one of the cleanest cities in East Africa, like it was. Uganda is also known as the Pearl of Africa. So, trying to make sure it remains that pearl that, all of us are proud of and, can continue to keep for our children. Mm. So for me, getting into the innovation space started with my work with the World Bank project, where around the Lake Victoria, which is one of the largest freshwater lakes in Africa. And so my role there was as an aquatics researcher. So I was doing monitoring of wetlands in urban centers. And one of the things that intrigued me was the amount of trash that was thrown into these wetlands. They were actually known as wastelands. And so all the biodiversity, the vegetation was dying. And, every time I took samples, I got so depressed. And I was thinking about what can one do to really improve the situation. So when an opportunity came for me to do a PhD in urban sanitation and waste management in the Netherlands, I was very excited. I was the only female of the 3 candidates that was selected with, by highly worldly renowned professors to study in the Netherlands. So when I told people I was going to do a PhD in urban sanitation and waste management, they thought I was out of my mind. People were like, I mean, who does that? You're a lady, so what are you going to do after this PhD? And, studying human waste, studying garbage, I mean, what kind of career are you, foreseeing? So for me, I was just excited because I knew what I was seeing in these wetlands. And when I reached the Netherlands, I was even more thankful because for me, even my mindset of, oh, this is garbage, we need to get rid of it, and out of sight, out of mind, really changed because in the Netherlands, I realized that garbage is gold. It's a treasure, it's wealth. So when I visited the facilities.
What do you mean by that, Dr. Judith? Can you just elaborate for us? I think, in my mind, as you're describing, what the wetlands were like, I think about, so many of us maybe have taken a vacation or we've experienced, paddling or even swimming around mangroves and seeing the biodiversity that exists. When you were in Kampala, you saw all the garbage and trash kind of washing up on the shore, right? Getting caught in these mangroves and seeing the choking of animals and wildlife and really that destruction. But so when you move to the Netherlands and you start embarking on this PhD, what was that mindset shift of trash is gold? How do we get it, even in conceptually to get to that state? How do we think about it?
Oh my God. So the first thing was, I didn't know that we could generate electricity from garbage. So for me, that alone was a wake-up call. And then secondly, I saw the wealth, and did even some research and found that even in the US, the richest people are in garbage collection. Look at, waste management company, they tell their story. But it's so fascinating that the mindset.
Organized crime, right? It's a profitable business. If you're not in the drug trade or illegal alcohol in the 1920s, if you are in the illegal garbage business, right, then chances are there's a mountain of money to be made from trash.
Absolutely.
Maybe Oscar the Grouch is really a millionaire, right? If we think about Sesame Street and that Oscar the Grouch, maybe he's just sitting on gold bullion in that little trash can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beauty about garbage is that it's a resource that cannot be depleted. I mean, studies have shown that now we are about 2 trillion or billion trash. I think that we generate globally, but this is going to, grow to 3.4. So which resource do we have that can increase in that amount? Every day, our minerals and all these others are being depleted, but trash is predicted to increase. What an opportunity. And when you see the things that, we can do out of trash, I'll give you an example. In Australia, houses are being, self-sustainable houses are being built out of trash using tires, using bottles, using, tins. And it's even amazing that they've not only gone to build these houses out of trash, but they've also gone to recycle their wastewater. So, they've planted some, plants, kind of tropical, that do the recycling of the wastewater. So this water is again used to flush toilets and also water their gardens. But they don't pay bills of electricity. They don't pay water bills. As you know, these are some of the most, expensive utilities that, developed and developing countries, have to grapple with. So you see those opportunities, but also the job creation. Every day we are grappling with the unemployment. But, right next to you in your neighborhood, in your home, there's this opportunity that you can use to generate, money or income. So, I mean, it is just wealth. It is just gold. The opportunities there are so many. But unfortunately, we've not tapped into those opportunities. For instance, the plastics, I think in the US, I was reading a study about only 5% is recycled. 5% of the plastic that is generated.
20 years of us separating all of this trash, right? And we're just coming to learn that only 5% actually gets recycled. It's heartbreaking. And it feels also a little bit like we were cheated. You know, we were told to do all this separating, and yet it's not working.
Absolutely. But also the opportunities for innovations, if we go back to innovations. And this is where, my next passion is, interesting these innovations in universities. A lot of what, we learn in university is policy around garbage. So there's not much innovation on, okay, how can we turn this garbage into, wealth? How can we use this garbage to improve the environment? Because of all the things around climate change, garbage is dumped in the open places. And as you know, the gases that are emitted, methane, these are what are contributing to climate change. And, majority of this, of course, in developing countries, it's a huge challenge. We don't have the capacity, but also the funding for, engineered landfills where we can manage this gas. So a lot of opportunities around there, which I feel that students, right from, bachelor's level could be interested or encouraged to think about, hey, this is a big global problem, but it is also an opportunity for you to create jobs, wealth, and all these things, that come with this resource. So for me, the one thing that I am grappling with now is mindset change also of universities. Like, how do they see, how can I interest them to see that this garbage is not just, a waste, it is a resource. And that's why I am so grateful to Harvard for having even noted my passion and work around garbage and written that case study about me, which is being taught globally around all universities. And one person said, why the title Garbage Lady? I mean, are you even proud to be called a garbage lady? And I said, yes. And I chose that, title myself because I love my garbage. I know that there are opportunities, in garbage. So I can go on and on about garbage. I am just fascinated because I know that, this is a resource that we can all benefit from. And also, at the same time, improving our environment.
Yeah. So let's get a little bit deeper because, we certainly have some folks who are on the municipal side who are listeners on this call, on this podcast, but also on the corporate side. And you've worked on that phase too. So let's start from the big business side of things. What can corporations really do when they think about their ESG goals, their environmental sustainability, right, and governance goals, and also looking at equity? What do you think large companies should be thinking about when it comes to adding trash as part of their environmental goals? Every company has 100 different bins to sort their stuff, but we're learning it's not working. What else can we do?
I think, thank you for that question, and it's very important. So for me, again, just before I answer that question, one of the challenges we have is that, trash is so centralized. The systems are very centralized that, you have to collect this garbage and take it, transport it to a landfill somewhere, some kilometers away. But, at the source, even when we are talking of how can corporations, integrate this garbage into all these policies that they have, I think for me is beginning with those innovations at the source. How can these companies support research, that can improve garbage management at their locations? I'll give you an example.
Okay.
As you know, for plastics or any recyclables, they will give us bins to put in. But remember, it's so bulky. It's so bulky. So the amount of fuel, even transportation, that is used to transport recyclables could have been reduced if we got technologies that can either compress the garbage at the source, come up with those sort of innovations, but also support research, working, of course, with governments and academic institutions. So, I mean, there's a lot that can be done at the source, at the corporation level, at the household level, and as community level. Even communities, there are some communities that have some land where a lot of these innovations can take place. For instance, for the green waste, this could be compost, turned into compost and then used to green, around these neighborhoods instead of buying,
I was actually,
manure.
I was reading a study, just thinking prior to this call, about a town that had decided to give away 3 chickens to every family who wanted chickens. I think about it now as the price of eggs, tops around $7.50 here in the United States, as we're in this big egg inflation bubble, which I'm not exactly sure how it's come about. But what they found was that they virtually eliminated food waste in families that adopted the chicken by something like 15 tons per year, based on these families that were suddenly now feeding scraps to the chickens, and by the way, got free eggs in the process. And so it was the most simple thing, and not to mention, the alleviation of that cost from the average household budget. But what an amazing shift to think about eliminating green waste by just offering chickens to families who wanted them.
So absolutely.
But to our corporate partners who may not be, our corporate listeners who may not be able to suddenly start raising chickens in urban environments here in New York City, I know my neighbors would have an issue with it for sure. But as we think about it, just at the large corporation level, and I'm thinking about large consulting firms like the Deloittes and the KPMGs and the Accentures and E&Y. The beginning of that discussion about elimination of waste, does it begin with the supply chain? Is that where we start looking at it, or do we begin looking at it in our own 4 corporate walls? Where does the thinking begin?
I think it begins both ways. Even because from the supply chain, this is where, they actually encourage the waste, from the packaging and all this. Everything, I think, most of the foods in America are packaged, in plastic,
Right, like an apple comes wrapped in cellophane.
Exactly. At least there's a plastic involved, even though they don't come wrapped, but the bag they give you is plastic until recently when they started changing to paper bags. So, I mean, for me, I think here, my approach would be not to blame, but to how do we get everyone working together? The suppliers, the consumers, the government, the garbage collectors, the academia. So how do we get everyone, the communities, get involved in this this whole chain of waste management? Because let me tell you, it doesn't matter. The current companies cannot finish all the waste. So there's nothing like, oh my gosh, if we innovate, then we'll lose business. Because we already have the statistics, the garbage generation is going to continue. Right now, at the suppliers, I don't think they have a lot of alternatives. They will continue to use plastic. and also metal. So how can we work together with them to find solutions? And I think for me, the suppliers should be working more with the academia, supporting research. This is what the dilemma is. How can we help the consumer to reduce on, for instance, the disposal of plastics in our water bodies, in the environment and in the air. So for me, I think it just requires that conversation. And this conversation can only happen also if universities are interested. If they are interested, because
are they interested here in the United States? Are they interested in
I don't think they're, this garbage conversation, because everyone generates waste, and because there's a truck that comes and takes your waste, we all have this mentality, out of sight, out of mind. So they don't care where this waste ends up, whether in our water bodies. Of course, research has been done, but again, the mindset shift is still a challenge, and not only here in the US, but globally. So I was fascinated by Sweden. I read a publication about Sweden. In Sweden, they actually import garbage. They import garbage to continue sustaining their electricity plants, because they generate garbage from electricity. Can you imagine that? Importing garbage, so that, yeah.
Tell us more about that, Dr. Judith, because I don't think most Americans know that Sweden imports garbage to fuel its power plants. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, yes, they do. And they use these plants to heat their homes during the winter. And you know how expensive it is for heating during the winter. So these are the opportunities. So, but how do we get there? Researching best practices from Europe, countries like Sweden, countries like, the Netherlands, Germany. All these, I think, have pioneered the use of garbage in a sustainable way. So I feel if we brought this knowledge here in the US and other countries, then there would be opportunity. Because I think when people start to realize the importance of waste, at some point they'll start fighting for this waste because they'll see the beauty about, the waste. So for me, it's about education, knowledge, changing mindset, but also investing in research to come up with innovations that can turn this waste into wealth, So the opportunities are there, and countries have done it. So I don't see why it can't be done here and world over.
So why are we still so fossil fuel oil dependent, right? Energy dependent, when we have this abundant resource? Do you think there's a lack of political will or a lack of knowledge that says, before we start investing in solar, wind, and water, right, all of which are very important, let's figure out how to get rid of the garbage and turn that into fuel first? Why do you think we're not doing that?
I think, frankly, besides the politics, I think people are not aware. People are not aware that you can actually generate electricity from garbage. People are not aware.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So, and it's been done. There's some electricity, I think I was reading about somewhere in Las Vegas. There are some states where, but it's on a small scale, compared to the abundance of the resource. So I feel that there's need for publicity. And I feel this also needs to start, at the academic institutions. Because, the conversations around garbage, I learned it because I did a PhD, and I also studied in the Netherlands. Had I not done that, I would still have the mindset of, how do I get rid of this garbage from the wetland? And I wouldn't care where it ended up, As long as it's not in the wetland, I don't care where else it ends up. So that's the mindset. So I feel, in addition to teaching, even high school students and other elementary students that, you need to sort your garbage. You need also to teach them that, by the way, out of this garbage, there's treasure. There's a lot you can do out of recycling. And for even teachers to be more practical and start teaching students like how to recycle using plastics. I mean, you can do a lot of nice things out of this. And I know some schools do that, but I think on a small scale. So the opportunities are there, but I think it's just the mindset. And I've only talked about electricity. We know we can construct houses. We know we can construct roads, from all this plastic that is ending up in our water bodies. So there's a lot that we can use. We can green our environment from the compost, and we can also reduce on the methane that is generated from these landfills. So, and open dumping. So the opportunities are there. Yeah. But I think we just need to introduce this in our universities, allow for more research, all of us working together.
So you are in the research capital of the United States. You are in Cambridge. You are surrounded by MIT and Harvard and Amherst and a host of other universities that do some of the best research in the world, especially in innovation. So tell us, in your work with Cambridge, the city of Cambridge, what are you working on now and what can we learn from it, Dr. Judith?
Yeah, so right now for the city of Cambridge, so I oversee the federal grants unit. We receive 4 entitlement grants each year for the community development block grant, the emergency solutions grant, there's a HOPA, which helps people living with HIV, and home, which helps with affordable housing. So there are opportunities there also around how do you innovate around these limited funds to be able to provide these much needed, services. For instance, affordable housing. That is a huge need.
Around the country
and so
and around the world.
Part of these funds do support this. And one thing about Cambridge also, like you said, it's really an innovative city. We've also gone now green for buildings. We have our flag project called the Finch housing project that is 100% affordable. And so there are about 98 units that, part of this money also contributed to. And it's also a green building. So there's innovation there. I think what would be even more interesting would be if it's sustainable. Like if we could be able to recycle, for instance, the wastewater, or if we could generate electricity out of, even the human waste. So one of the innovations that I did in Uganda was introduce what we call biocenters in schools. So these biocenters really are like toilets where we can generate electricity. And this electricity was used to cook lunch for the students. So instead of using firewood, we would use,
human waste, right?
Gas from human waste.
Yeah. And I think Bill Gates wanted to start this program, a decade ago, right? He had like a worldwide campaign for the reinvention of the toilet and what it was capable of doing.
Yeah.
And I think this was one of the ideas that came from one of the entrepreneurs and engineers to build it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there are so many things that we can do. And also, with all, especially because now we are going high rise. So the opportunity is there because for these projects to be successful, you also need a certain amount of human waste. So the higher the population, the better for it, because we could, generate more electricity. So the high-rise buildings, for instance, could have their own, facility that could, provide electricity to these for lighting, for warming, so the opportunities are there to renovate around there. But again, like I said, most of these innovations require, education, knowledge, change of mindsets, And some of them are not that cheap. They are not that cheap. And when we are given limited funding to really build these facilities, so you have to weigh between building this facility and also a home, you know, a family unit. So sometimes we have to forego some of these innovations because we have to, because of the need. So, but the opportunities are there. The opportunities are there, but also there are not so many examples where we can look to and say, hey, like this building is self-sustaining, you know? So how can we also borrow the technology from there, you know? I don't think there's any building in Cambridge that, for instance, uses human waste for electricity. So
I
those
don't
are
think
some of
there's
the
any building
innovations.
in the United States that does that. Not to my knowledge. Are you familiar with any?
No, but I think for me, MIT, that has one of the best engineers and tech people, could do that in MIT because they have the resources. Like have, like, say, one of the student housing, you know, pilot that there and show the world that it's possible. The same with Harvard. You could do that. The amount, for instance, of garbage that is generated in those two institutions is enough to put up their own facilities, you know.
Wow.
So they should lead by example, be self-sustaining. But I don't know why, but, you know, talking about waste, human waste and garbage, these are very unsexy areas. People don't care, people don't, you know, even when you go to these toilets, the way some of people leave these toilets shows you that they don't care, they don't even see any usefulness. So
if
they
you
would
went to
just,
an airport bathroom, you know
yeah,
that that's the truth.
exactly, you'd rather just drop, forget, out of mind, out of sight, which is sad because we can do a lot of useful things out of, you know, waste, both human and garbage. So for me, I see an opportunity there. I am still networking and trying to see how do I interest people to see the beauty of this garbage, to also teach this generation and the next generation that, hey, we don't have to, you know, continue polluting this, our environment, but be able to use this resource that is not depletable to do great stuff, create jobs, address climate change, you know, improve the utilities, you know. So it's a lot of good stuff there. We just need people of the mindset to see what some of us are seeing.
Yeah, so true. So, you know, as we, in thinking about this next step, do you think there's a role for government regulation in mandating some of these changes that you're talking about?
Well, I don't know if it's really to do with mandating. I feel it's more to do with first of all, raising awareness. You know, because one of the things people hate is regulation, mandates. They I think involving them first through education. People also want to see. They don't want to be told. They want to see what's working, you know? Having some of those examples. And for me, that's why I feel government needs to invest in research. They need to work with these academia to do some of these innovations. Innovation has been left to private sector. Innovation has been left to just the academic institutions without much support from government. So government needs to put aside money and work with these institutions to continue developing sustainable innovations, self-sustaining innovations. One of the challenges we have with innovations is that most of them are not sustainable because one, they're expensive, some of them, and also people are not quite interested because they are very limited players. But if you have all these players, government, private sector, the community, you know, it becomes easy for everyone to see the usefulness of that innovation and also want to, sort of adopt it. So I feel that even for government, like for cities, I have not seen a lot of innovation offices in cities, even though they are there. The innovation is about, oh, how can we improve data collection? How can we automate? Those are the innovations that most of these offices handle. But innovation around creating actually a technology, that is limited. And of course, it's left to private sector, and private sector also kind of struggles because private sector has to look at the profits.
That's right.
Versus what they put in. So
Well, they could also see it as not just profits, but also as investment, right?
Exactly.
Because at the moment, just looking at the way that, governments and municipalities are structuring some of these opportunities, there are grants to be had. There are tax credits to be had. There are so many different ways of creatively financing these shifts that I don't think it's that problematic when you look at not just cost or profit, but there are big handouts, especially here in the United States, given the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act and so many others that are driving companies and municipalities to make serious changes.
Yeah. And for me, again, going back to your question of government, I feel the people need to be at the center.
Yes.
Because they are the users. And for any innovation, sometimes we talk about innovation and we forget about the people we are inventing for. Now, if these people are not involved in any kind of innovation, if you do not involve the people that you're innovating for, sometimes these innovations fail.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking for them, and you're not hearing from them. So sometimes it's important that you hear from, all the stakeholders and see how you can, work together to produce innovations that are sustainable.
So true. And, we often say that the most important part of storytelling, great storytelling, is great listening.
Yeah.
And this practice, what we've referred to in the field of innovation storytelling and in design thinking and in the creation of new innovative spaces, is called appreciative inquiry, where we begin to ask the people that we're impacting, what matters to you?
Exactly.
What would create the greatest shift possible for you? What do you think would have the most impact in a negative way, in a positive way? That appreciative inquiry is such an important practice. And for my listeners, if you're not familiar, I could do a whole show just on appreciative inquiry alone as an anthropologist. But that piece that you're talking about is also what drives the other side, right? There are forces that would say, don't use trash, like use another mechanism that is expensive and resource intensive instead of what you already have, right? There's no one advocating from the trash lobby to make, or the human waste or the green waste lobby to get us to use it as opposed to other alternatives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are so used to these centralized systems, labor intensive, capital intensive. So that's our mentality. We are used to those, big ones. And we've not, stopped to think about, hey, can we do this at our community level, at the city level, at, neighborhood level, or even state level? So yeah, it's really a big challenge. And I think for me, the small innovations within communities would help a lot with this problem of, waste.
So can you give us an example, of small communities that have really done it right? Like, give us an example of some of the things that they've done that have been fantastic in your mind, little small incremental changes?
Yeah, I think the communities that I can give, well, most of them are in Europe, and I know that, like, I gave an example of Sweden, and Sweden was really, they did away, there's a community that did away with flush toilets. So they came up with toilets where they could separate urine and the human waste, and then would generate electricity out of that.
Mm.
Then the urine could also be used in their gardens. And then there are also some communities where, you know, the wastewater goes into lagoons, you know, and in there, you know, they've put up plants that can, electricity is generated out of those lagoons to power again some of these houses. I mean, for lighting, for heating. So there are some of those, and I can get you some of the concrete examples of these. But yeah, it's been done, and I think Europe, you know, are kind of pioneers in that. More than I think the US and the rest of the world. But yeah, for me, I think my biggest concern is where this waste ends, you know? And we've seen our water bodies choking because of pollution from plastics and other waste. We have seen biodiversity lost, with the environment polluted. So if we can do something before it even gets worse, because the waste is anyway going to increase, for me, and with the population growth, of course, it's an opportunity really.
Yeah.
For anyone who cares about the environment, yeah, and cares about humanity.
In my mind, I think the greatest intersection of where we could have the greatest catalyst for this kind of opportunity, and I'm curious about your own perspective, is the tourism industry.
Yeah.
You know, I think about having lived in places like Thailand and in Costa Rica and in Europe, around Europe as well. There are some places, like I think about beautiful places in Thailand that are just getting destroyed with an influx of tourists who don't have the infrastructure to manage the tourism, but even more importantly, the waste that those tourists produce, because it's such, you know, a beautiful, pristine beaches that are quiet and uninhabited, you know, maybe 20 years ago. Thailand receives 40 million tourists per year in a place that doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure to handle the waste that 40 million additional humans bring with them and create for the citizens who live there.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge opportunity if tourism were, it's the most sexy coupled with the least sexy thing I can think of, is going on a great vacation and then having to think about the trash I produce. You know, all I want to do is not think about, all I want to do is create out of sight, out of mind when I'm on vacation. But I think it's probably the greatest point of like conflict and friction of what gets left behind when I get back on the plane to go home, knowing how much waste I've produced. And, you know, studies will show that on vacation, we eat more, we drink more, we buy more stuff, we, you know, leave stuff so much more behind. I think this is like the most perfect intersection of thinking about who's creating the most trash, who's leaving it behind, and who's thinking least of all about the people it impacts. Yeah.
Absolutely. Tourism is a huge deal, but also on the flip on the other side, I think also I can argue that also trash can impact tourism in a negative way, because no one wants to go visit a place that has garbage.
That's
and
right.
I think this is true for developing countries, where, you know, of course, the waste management systems are still in their need. So it's difficult to attract people to visit those places. So I think both ways, like how do you improve tourism? You improve it by improving the waste management system. Right. And also, how do you address the issue of these so many tourists that come in and, you know, eat a lot and dispose of this waste? in the environment. I think, again, it gets back to, if there was a leader like the US is in some of these technologies, I can assure you most of these countries would want to do the same.
Would want to adopt them.
They want to adapt them. So, but the fact that there are very few leaders, like, Sweden, like Germany, but also not much is written about that. So it becomes very difficult to sort of start these conversations and also have, these systems that can really address that challenge. So if we can have the US taking the lead, then other countries can follow, because you'll be like, oh, it's worked in the US, so it can work here. But also, it's true that there are also some homegrown solutions which don't necessarily have to work
Or wait
in the
for
US, but work for them. So I think for me, it's just a global thing. Like, how do we encourage governments, learning institutions to be able to embrace this issue of garbage? So it's a really a global concern, but the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
How we do it, I'm not sure, but I think, like I said earlier, starting with the learning institutions or the academia is an opportunity.
If we will listen. So, I think about even at the local level, how behaviors have to change. And I think better storytelling is required there. I remember when I was living in Thailand, this was back in 1994, the person who was selling me a Coca-Cola would have, a glass bottle of Coca-Cola, which could be recycled, right? Brought back to the plant and refilled again. But that vendor would take the glass bottle of Coca-Cola, they would pour it into a plastic sandwich bag. They would then tie it up with a rubber band, which I could then hang on my finger, and they would put a plastic straw in it. So I found in one beautiful, ecologically perfectly packaged soft drink, I now had 3 additional pieces of waste that were being handed to me when I just could have taken the glass bottle. Right. So we have evolved these systems because we are in such deep desire for mobility, right? That everything is plastic around us, that now we have to go back and change, what started off as, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. Get a glass bottle, bring the bottle back. And now we have added 3 layers of plastic to every bottle of Coke.
And that's why it's important to work with the Coca-Cola company and say, hey, you've increased this plastic, so how can we work together?
They said, we made the bottle. You guys screwed it up once it left the plant, right? So we also have to tell a different story about, either why the glass bottle matters, or if we're going to create plastic bottles, to do it in a way that's, maybe it's now made out of corn, or it's being made out of, different materials that biodegrade. So we have to tell a different story to ourselves and to the manufacturers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But make sure everyone is involved in the conversation.
Right.
I think that's what matters. Yeah. Everyone, like in Uganda, so for the plastic bottles, we were working with the Pepsi company, Coca-Cola. They set up recycling plants. So there was that kind of, partnership between the city and the companies, because they did provide incentives, like people who took all these plastics back, they would be paid because they would be weighed and then, given some money. So this kind of motivated to encourage people to do more recycling. So the opportunities are there, like how do you work with these companies that generate, or produce the plastics? So yeah, it's important to have conversations with them. But like I said, there's no one size fits all. What works in Sweden may not work in the US. What works in the US may not work in Africa. But I think for me to be aware and come up with innovations that can work, in each of the different, communities, countries, is for me what's most important. And the innovations are there.
Yes. Well, Judith, I always conclude every conversation here with 3 hot seat questions. So let me ask them of you. What do you think is the greatest innovation of all time?
Oh my gosh. I think the garbage to electricity.
Yes, if we can scale that, that would be amazing.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So number 2 is if you had the opportunity to participate in any innovation team throughout human history, to join a team of them making something phenomenal, which team would you have joined?
The garbage team.
You are singularly focused. Okay.
Yes.
My last question is if is there an innovation you would love to see in the world that does not exist today? What would that innovation be?
Oh my God, that's a hard one. An innovation that doesn't exist. Oh my gosh.
That you would love to see something that could be invented that would solve the world's biggest problems. What do you think? Or small problems? Maybe you just need the right toenail clipper. I don't know. Better toothbrush.
I think well, it's interesting, but I think I would like to see cars, made out of waste.
Cars made out of waste.
Yeah.
We'll have to get Elon Musk on that before he goes to Mars.
Yeah, at least some parts of the car made out of recycled waste.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Judith Tumusiime, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? How would you like them to reach you?
Yeah, so my email address is tjudith2017@gmail.com. I'll repeat again, tjudith2017@gmail.com.
Fantastic. And if they want to read more of your work and the case studies that Harvard has done on you, where can they find that?
So they can find them on the website of the Harvard Bloomberg City Leadership Initiative or the Harvard Kennedy School. And I also have other publications on West in other international peer-reviewed journals, and I'm also on ResearchGate. So I mean, you can just Google my name and you'll have all that information. But I had one thing I wanted to say, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah, so I once had a professor who was, teaching us climate change, and he shared with us the grandfather's theory. Now, the grandfather's theory is, it says that grandfather who planted that tree where he was not even sure that his unborn grandchildren will ever utilize, it's the same thing. We need to take care of this environment, plan it for even those grandchildren we are not sure we'll ever see, because our forefathers did it, and we can also do it through innovative ways in which to manage garbage.
Well said, Dr. Judith. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Dr. Judith Tumusiime, thank you so much for joining me on the Innovation Storytellers Show.
Thank you, my pleasure.